Imagine standing on the cliffs of Dover in 1944, looking across the English Channel toward the beaches of France, knowing that the fate of the entire world rests on a single secret. Picture thousands of soldiers preparing for the most dangerous mission in history, while just miles away, an army of ghosts stands ready to deceive the most powerful military machine ever built. This is not a fantasy or a fairy tale. This is the true story of how inflatable tanks, fake radio chatter, and dummy soldiers created the most successful military deception of all time, fooling Adolf Hitler so completely that it changed the course of World War II forever. The story you are about to hear sounds impossible, yet every word is true. It is a tale of creativity, bravery, and pure genius that saved hundreds of thousands of lives and helped win the greatest war humanity has ever known. When the Allied forces began planning the invasion of Nazi-occupied Europe in 1943, military leaders faced a terrifying problem that kept them awake at night. Hitler's armies controlled the entire coastline of France, from the northern beaches near Belgium all the way down to the Spanish border. German soldiers had built massive concrete fortifications called the Atlantic Wall, with machine gun nests, artillery batteries, and millions of mines buried in the sand. The Nazis knew an invasion was coming. Everyone knew it. The question was not if the Allies would attack, but where and when. If Hitler discovered the real invasion location before the attack began, he could move all his best troops there and turn the beaches into a killing ground. The Allied commanders understood that secrecy alone would not be enough. They needed something more powerful than secrecy. They needed to make Hitler believe something that was completely false. The British and American generals studied the problem from every angle, looking at maps and coastlines, counting German divisions and calculating odds. They realized that even if they kept their real plans secret, Hitler would still make his best guess and might guess correctly just by chance. The beaches of Normandy offered the shortest route to Paris and made perfect military sense as an invasion point. German intelligence officers were smart and experienced. They would study the same maps and reach the same conclusions. Simply hiding the truth would never be enough to save the invasion. The Allies needed to do something far more difficult and dangerous. They needed to plant false information in Hitler's mind so convincingly that he would ignore all evidence to the contrary. They needed to create an entire fake reality that the Germans would believe without question. In the secret rooms beneath London, where Churchill and Eisenhower planned the war, a bold idea began to take shape in early 1944. The operation would be called Fortitude, and it would become the most elaborate deception scheme ever attempted in warfare. The plan was breathtaking in its ambition and shocking in its simplicity. The Allies would create a completely fake army, give it fake commanders, station it in fake camps, and make Hitler believe this phantom force would invade France at Pas de Calais, the narrowest point of the English Channel, over 100 miles northeast of the real landing beaches in Normandy. Every radio message, every reconnaissance photo, every piece of intelligence the Germans gathered would tell them the same lie over and over until it became their truth. The masterminds behind Fortitude understood that making Hitler believe a lie required more than just telling that lie once or twice. The deception had to be layered, complex, and consistent across every possible way the Germans might gather information. If German spy planes flew over England, they had to see an army. If German intelligence intercepted radio signals, they had to hear an army communicating. If German spies reported back to Berlin, they had to describe an army preparing for battle. Most importantly, the fake army had to seem so real and so threatening that Hitler would hold his best troops at Pas de Calais, even after the real invasion began at Normandy. The Allies needed Hitler to believe that Normandy was just a diversion and that the real attack was still coming at Calais. This meant the illusion had to survive even after the truth started to become obvious. The task of creating a fake army fell to a special unit that combined military officers with artists, stage designers, sound engineers, and special effects experts from Hollywood and London's theater district. These creative geniuses understood illusion and deception in ways that traditional soldiers never could. They knew how to make audiences believe in worlds that did not exist. Now they would use those skills to create the most important performance in history. The Ghost Army needed to look real from every angle and fool every type of observation the Germans might use. This meant building thousands of fake tanks, fake airplanes, fake trucks, and fake artillery pieces that would appear genuine to aerial reconnaissance cameras flying at high altitude. The inflatable tanks became the cornerstone of the deception and represented a triumph of practical creativity under impossible pressure. Engineers designed rubber and canvas structures that could be inflated with air pumps in just a few hours. From the ground, these inflatables looked obviously fake, like parade balloons shaped like military vehicles. But from 5,000 feet in the air, when photographed by German reconnaissance planes, they appeared identical to real Sherman tanks. Each inflatable cost only a tiny fraction of what a real tank cost, yet served its purpose perfectly. Teams of soldiers would arrive at a field in the middle of the night, inflate dozens of tanks before dawn, and create the appearance of an entire armored division that had moved into position under cover of darkness. The same technique worked for artillery pieces, trucks, and even landing craft that were positioned along the coast. The fake airfields presented an even greater challenge because they had to convince high-altitude photography and also needed to show signs of activity and life. The deception teams built full-size dummy aircraft from wood and canvas, painting them with careful attention to detail and positioning them exactly as real squadrons would arrange their planes. But static models were not enough. The Germans would expect to see personnel moving around the planes, fuel trucks servicing them, and other signs of a working airbase. So the deception teams created fake fuel trucks and equipment vehicles, and small groups of real soldiers would move around the fake planes on a schedule, creating tire tracks and footpaths that would show up in photographs. They even hung laundry near the fake barracks and created fake anti-aircraft positions to make the bases look properly defended. While the physical props formed the visual part of the deception, the radio deception created the invisible foundation that made everything believable. German intelligence services constantly monitored radio communications across England, using direction-finding equipment to locate transmitters and sophisticated code-breaking operations to understand the messages being sent. The Allies knew the Germans were listening to every signal, and they used this knowledge to feed false information directly into Hitler's intelligence network. Special radio operators transmitted thousands of fake messages every day, creating the radio signature of a massive army group preparing for invasion. Every unit in a real army generates radio traffic as officers coordinate with each other, request supplies, report status, and handle the countless details of military life. The fake army had to generate the same pattern of communications. The radio operators who staffed this phantom network were specially trained in the communication patterns and procedures of different military units. They knew how a tank battalion commander would speak to his superiors, what kind of messages an artillery unit would send, and how supply officers would coordinate logistics. Day after day, week after week, these operators maintained fake conversations between fake units, building up a complete picture of an army that existed only in radio waves and German intelligence reports. They complained about equipment problems that did not exist, requested supplies for soldiers who were not there, and coordinated training exercises that never happened. The Germans listened carefully to every transmission, plotted the locations of the transmitters on their maps, and watched as the fake army grew larger and more threatening. Perhaps the most brilliant and dangerous element of Operation Fortitude involved turning German spies against their masters without those spies even knowing they had been turned. British intelligence had successfully captured or identified every single German agent operating in Britain through a combination of brilliant code breaking and careful detective work. Rather than arresting these spies immediately, British intelligence did something far more valuable. They gave the spies false information to send back to Germany, using them as channels to deliver the deception directly into the heart of Hitler's intelligence headquarters. The spies believed they were serving Germany by reporting on Allied preparations, never knowing that every piece of information they sent had been carefully crafted by British intelligence to support the Fortitude deception. One of the most important of these double agents was a Spanish national code named Garbo by the British and Arable by the Germans, who had created a fictional network of sub-agents supposedly scattered across Britain. Through this imaginary network, Garbo sent hundreds of detailed reports to German intelligence describing the fake army, its equipment, its commanders, and its apparent target of Pas-de-Calais. The Germans trusted Garbo completely because his earlier reports had been accurate on minor matters that the British had deliberately allowed him to report correctly. Now, when it mattered most, that trust would be turned into a weapon. Garbo described fake troop movements, fake training exercises, and fake preparations for an assault on Calais with such detail and consistency that German analysts had no reason to doubt any of it. Every report confirmed what the radio intercepts and aerial photographs were already showing. To make the fake army completely believable, it needed a commander whose reputation would convince Hitler that the threat was real. The Allies chose General George Patton for this role, and the choice was absolutely perfect. Patton was already famous as the most aggressive and successful American tank commander, and German intelligence considered him the most dangerous general in the Allied forces. Hitler himself believed that Patton would certainly lead any major invasion. By placing Patton in command of the fake 1st United States Army Group stationed in southeastern England, directly across from Pas-de-Calais, the Allies made the deception irresistible to German thinking. Where Patton went, the Germans believed, the real attack would follow. Patton played his role with enthusiasm, even though being assigned to command a fake army must have frustrated this action-hungry warrior. He appeared at fake headquarters, inspected fake units, and gave speeches to real soldiers who were part of the deception teams. German spies reported seeing Patton in southeastern England, and these reports went straight to Hitler's desk. The Führer and his generals looked at their maps and saw exactly what the Allies wanted them to see. A massive army under Patton's command, positioned perfectly to strike across the shortest route to France, aimed directly at Pas-de-Calais. Everything about the picture made perfect military sense, which was exactly why the Germans believed it without question. They expected the Allies to take the shortest, most logical route, and the deception gave them exactly what they expected to see. As spring turned to early summer in 1944, the pace of the deception increased to a frantic level. The real invasion force was gathering in southern England, preparing to strike at Normandy, while the fake army in southeastern England continued its elaborate performance. Every day brought new risks that the Germans might discover the truth. Every day the deception teams worked to make their phantom army more convincing. More inflatable tanks appeared in fields near Dover. More radio traffic filled the airwaves. More fake supply dumps were constructed. German reconnaissance planes flew over England constantly, photographing everything they could see, and every photograph showed them exactly what the deception teams wanted them to see. The tension among Allied commanders reached almost unbearable levels as June approached. The entire invasion plan depended on surprise. If Hitler discovered that Normandy was the real target, he could move his panzer divisions there before the invasion began, and the result would be catastrophic. Thousands of young men would die on the beaches, and the invasion might fail completely. Everything depended on Hitler keeping his best forces at Pas-de-Calais, waiting for Patton's fake army to launch the attack that would never come. Intelligence reports showed that German forces were indeed concentrated at Calais, with fewer troops defending Normandy. The deception was working, but would it continue to work after the invasion began? When the real invasion began at Normandy on the 6th of June 1944, the deception entered its most critical and dangerous phase. Allied forces stormed the beaches under heavy fire, fighting desperately to establish a foothold in France. Every hour that Hitler kept his reserve forces at Calais waiting for the fake invasion meant fewer German soldiers fighting against the real invasion. The success of the entire operation now depended on continuing the illusion, even as the truth was literally exploding on the beaches of Normandy. This is when Operation Fortitude achieved its greatest triumph. The deception teams continued transmitting radio messages from Patton's Phantom Army, making it appear ready to launch the real attack at Calais. German double agents sent urgent messages to Berlin insisting that Normandy was merely a diversion and that the main assault at Calais was still coming. Hitler and his generals looked at the reports from Normandy and faced a critical decision. Should they send their reserve panzer divisions to Normandy to crush the invasion, or should they keep those forces at Calais in case the Normandy landing was really just a trick to draw troops away from the real invasion target? The fake radio traffic from Patton's army continued without pause. The fake installations remained visible in aerial photographs. Most importantly, the double agents in whom German intelligence had placed complete trust all confirmed the same story. Normandy was a diversion. Calais was the real target. For weeks after D-Day, Hitler kept his most powerful forces waiting at Pas de Calais for an invasion that existed only in radio signals and inflatable rubber. By the time Hitler finally realized he had been deceived, it was too late. Allied forces had established a strong position in Normandy and were pushing inland. The critical window when German reinforcements might have pushed the invasion back into the sea had closed. The dummy army had done its job so well that it had literally changed the outcome of the war. Military historians who later studied the operation estimated that Operation Fortitude probably saved tens of thousands of Allied lives and reduced the length of the war by several months. The deception succeeded beyond anyone's wildest hopes, yet almost nobody could be told about it. The operation remained top secret for decades after the war ended because the intelligence methods used in Fortitude were still valuable for future operations. The men and women who created and maintained the deception could not tell their families what they had done. The soldiers who inflated fake tanks and moved dummy airplanes could not explain how their work had saved countless lives. The radio operators who transmitted thousands of fake messages went home after the war without being able to share the most important accomplishment of their military service. The double agents who risked their lives feeding false information to the Germans lived for years knowing that their greatest contribution to victory could never be publicly acknowledged. This silence was perhaps the hardest part of the entire operation, because these brave and creative people deserved recognition for achieving something truly remarkable. When the full story of Operation Fortitude finally became public decades after the war ended, military strategists and historians realized that something fundamental had changed in warfare. For thousands of years, military deception had been a minor supporting element in war, something commanders might attempt on a small scale before a battle. After Fortitude, deception became recognized as a major strategic weapon that could be as important as tanks or airplanes. The operation proved that creative thinking and imagination could defeat raw military power. It showed that a few hundred people with inflatable tanks and radio transmitters could have more impact than thousands of real soldiers. Most importantly, it demonstrated that understanding your enemy's thinking and expectations could let you control what they believed, and therefore control their actions. Modern military forces around the world studied Operation Fortitude and incorporated its lessons into their training and planning. The idea that you could create an entirely fictional military force and make your enemy believe in it completely opened up new possibilities for strategic thinking. Deception operations in later conflicts, from the Cold War through modern times, all trace their intellectual ancestry back to those inflatable tanks in the fields of southeastern England. The artists and stage designers who helped create the dummy army showed that creative professions had vital roles to play in national defense. Their skills in creating illusion and manipulating perception turned out to be just as important as traditional military skills. For the German intelligence officers who spent months analyzing the reports about Patton's army and advising Hitler to keep forces concentrated at Calais, the discovery of the deception must have been devastating. These were smart, dedicated professionals who had simply been outplayed by opponents who understood human psychology better than they did. The German analysts had looked at all the evidence and reached the conclusion that the evidence supported, never realizing that every piece of evidence had been carefully crafted to lead them to exactly that conclusion. Their failure was not a failure of intelligence or dedication, but a failure to imagine that their enemies might be creating evidence rather than trying to hide it. The aftermath of the deception haunted some of these German officers for the rest of their lives. They had advised Hitler to keep critical forces away from Normandy, the most crucial moment of the war, and that advice had contributed to Germany's defeat. In their post-war writings and interviews, some of these officers expressed genuine admiration for the skill and creativity of the Allied deception, while also trying to understand how they had been so completely fooled. The psychological impact of realizing you have been systematically deceived on such a massive scale cannot be overstated. These men had built their professional identities on their ability to see through enemy lies and discover enemy plans, and Operation Fortitude had rendered those abilities completely useless. The impact of Operation Fortitude extended far beyond World War II and shaped military thinking for generations. The operation proved that information itself could be a weapon more powerful than bombs or bullets. In the decades after the war, as intelligence services became more sophisticated and technology made information easier to create and spread, the lessons of fortitude became even more relevant. The idea that you could control what your enemy believed and make them act on false information became central to Cold War strategy. Both sides in that conflict spent enormous resources trying to deceive each other while also trying to avoid being deceived themselves. In the modern world of digital information and social media, the principles behind Operation Fortitude have taken on new and sometimes troubling significance. The same techniques that saved thousands of lives in 1944 can now be used to spread false information to entire populations. The ability to create convincing but fictional evidence and make people believe things that are not true has become easier and more dangerous than ever before. Yet the positive legacy remains as well. Understanding how deception works helps us defend against it. Recognizing that evidence can be manufactured helps us think more critically about the information we receive. The story of the dummy army teaches us to question our assumptions and look deeper than surface appearances. While Operation Fortitude was a massive undertaking involving thousands of people, certain individuals stood out for their creativity and courage. The artists who designed the inflatable tanks solved engineering problems that had never been encountered before. They had to create structures that looked real from the air but could be transported easily, inflated quickly, and moved by small teams. The radio operators who maintained the fake communications network had to be actors as much as soldiers, creating believable characters and maintaining those fictional identities day after day without ever slipping up. The intelligence officers who managed the double agents had to think several steps ahead constantly, crafting information that would be believed today while setting up bigger deceptions for tomorrow. One particularly remarkable aspect of the operation was how many of the participants were not career military people, but civilians who volunteered or were recruited specifically for their creative skills. Fashion designers helped create fake uniforms and insignia. Sound engineers developed systems to make fake tank noises convincing. Photographers carefully analyzed German reconnaissance photos to understand exactly what the enemy cameras would see and what they would miss. These people brought skills and perspectives that traditional military thinking would never have valued, and their contributions proved absolutely essential. The dummy army succeeded precisely because it was created by people who understood illusion and believed in the power of creative thinking. The most critical moment in the entire operation came about 6 weeks after D-Day, when German intelligence finally began to suspect that they had been deceived. Reports from Normandy showed Allied forces far larger than expected, while the long-promised assault at Calais continued to not happen. German commanders started questioning whether they had been wrong about Allied intentions. This was the moment when the deception could have collapsed completely, potentially allowing Hitler to finally send his reserve forces to Normandy where they could still cause serious damage. Instead, the Allied deception teams doubled down on the lie. The double agents sent increasingly urgent messages insisting the Calais invasion was imminent and had merely been delayed. The radio traffic from the fake army increased. New evidence was created to support the fiction. The boldness of continuing the deception even as it started to unravel showed the deep understanding the Allied planners had of human psychology. They knew that people who have believed something strongly find it very difficult to admit they were wrong. They knew that German intelligence had invested so much credibility in the Calais story that abandoning it would mean admitting a catastrophic failure. So the deception teams gave the Germans just enough new evidence to let them continue believing what they wanted to believe. By the time Hitler finally accepted that there would be no invasion at Calais, the war in France had already been decided. The deception had worked just long enough to achieve its purpose. Even today, more than 80 years after Operation Fortitude deceived Hitler and changed history, the operation retains an almost magical quality that captures imaginations. There is something deeply appealing about the idea that creativity and intelligence can triumph over raw power. The image of inflatable tanks fooling the most powerful military in the world speaks to our desire to believe that clever underdogs can defeat stronger opponents through wit rather than force. For people who love stories of intelligence and strategy, Operation Fortitude represents the perfect combination of careful planning, bold execution, and successful outcome. It was a victory that came from thinking rather than fighting, from creating fiction rather than confronting reality directly. The operation also raises profound questions about the nature of reality and belief. If an entire army can exist in radio signals and inflatable rubber and be completely real to the people who believe in it, what does that say about how we construct our understanding of the world? The German intelligence officers who believed in Patton's Phantom Army were not stupid or careless. They were smart people who looked at evidence and reached logical conclusions. The fact that all their evidence was manufactured without them knowing, it suggests that our confidence in what we know should always be tempered with humility. We might all be looking at inflatable tanks and seeing real armies without ever knowing we have been deceived. As we step back and consider the complete story of how one dummy army fooled Hitler completely, we find ourselves confronting fundamental truths about warfare, deception, and human nature. Operation Fortitude succeeded because it understood that what people believe is more important than what is actually true. The fake army had real effects on the real world because German commanders made real decisions based on their belief in something that did not exist. This is the ultimate power and ultimate danger of deception. It can change reality by changing what people believe about reality. The men and women who created the dummy army understood this power and used it to save lives and win a war. They showed that sometimes the most effective weapon is not the one that destroys, but the one that deceives. The legacy of Operation Fortitude continues to shape our world in ways both obvious and subtle. Every military force studies deception and tries to create their own versions of the dummy army. Every intelligence service works to plant false information, while also trying to identify false information being planted by opponents. In our daily lives, we encounter deception constantly, from advertising that creates images of products that are more perfect than reality to social media posts that present lives that do not truly exist. Understanding how the dummy army worked helps us navigate this world of illusion and manipulation. It teaches us to look beneath surfaces, question convenient narratives, and remember that seeing is not always believing. The story of how inflatable tanks and fake radio signals changed the course of World War II stands as one of humanity's most remarkable achievements in creative problem-solving. It represents the triumph of imagination over force, of intelligence over strength, of careful planning over raw aggression. The thousands of lives saved by the deception, the shortened length of the war, and the inspiration provided to future generations all flow from the simple but profound idea that making someone believe a lie can sometimes achieve what truth alone cannot accomplish. As long as humans wage war and compete for advantage, the lessons of Operation Fortitude will remain relevant. As long as we tell stories about courage and creativity, the tale of the dummy army that fooled Hitler completely will continue to fascinate and inspire. This is not just history. This is the permanent proof that thinking can defeat power, that illusion can change reality, and that sometimes the best way to win a war is not to fight at all, but to make your enemy fight the wrong battle in the wrong place at the wrong time. The dummy army achieved exactly that, and in doing so, changed the world forever.